founders start companies, but teams build companies. But we do design and engineering, and they're like, well, nobody's good at both. And we were like, that's just crazy. Like, to build great products, you have to be good at both of those things. We did all the work ourselves, all the selling, all the building. When you're a bootstrap startup, I mean, your first mission is to survive. We didn't even know what the hell we were doing. The business needs to be ready, the market needs to be ready, and you need to be ready.
Today on the Deal Table, we're joined by Scott Harper, Dallas-based entrepreneur and co-founder of Dialexa, the digital product engineering firm he launched in 2010 with just $50, a domain name, and big dreams.
Under his leadership, Dialexa grew into a powerhouse consultancy, serving clients like Uber, Amazon, and Toyota before being acquired by IBM in 2022. Scott helped define digital product engineering as its own category, incubated ventures like Vinli and Robin Autopilot, and earned recognition as E&Y Entrepreneur of the Year.
Hope you enjoy. So Scott, welcome. Thank you for being here at the Deal Table, Old Parkland, Pig
Thanks
Room.
for having me.
Have you been in the pig room?
I've never been to the pig room before. I feel like every time I come to Old Parkland, I'm just blown away by some new little nook or cranny, you know, in the facilities where you just had no idea it was there before.
I totally agree with that. I literally was on an elevator ride earlier today and opened up and just said Civil War. And I'm like, everywhere you go, this is a museum.
Yeah. It is a museum.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Another Harlan Crow whimsy here of his affection for swine. We had a putting tournament here. There's a putting green on top of one of the roofs. And I think maybe 50 people, 100 people showed up for the putting contest at Old Parkland.
That's amazing. Yeah, I played one. I had a guy who officed here, and he said, hey, you want to come play squash? I said, I didn't know they had squash courts here. He said, yeah, they're down in the garage. And it's like,
yeah.
Who does that? And they said, well, they think parking garages are ugly, so they're trying to make them more interesting. And so there's squash courts and some, and, you know, other things and other ones, and that's fun.
Well, it's a great spot for a podcast that's focused on entrepreneurship, because we're in an ecosystem here of people that invest capital. And you certainly are a great fit as a guest for sort of our focus, because you are a founder, owner, operator who then sold your business to IBM. Congratulations.
Thank you.
On that whole journey. As someone, I didn't sell my business to IBM, although it was sold ultimately to Goldman Sachs. So, you know, I was one step removed from that, but I understand the entrepreneurial journey of starting a business, growing it, scaling it. Can you tell us a little bit about, well, first, you know, you started a business from what I see of $50 and a domain name. How did that turn into the business that you sold to IBM?
Yeah, so we started the company, you know, a bit unintentionally. We really started because we left the company we were working at prior due to some disagreements we had with some ethical things. Mm-hmm. And so we just said, hey, it's not right for the company for us to stay. It's not right for us to stay. And we both left. And he and I had worked, this is my business partner, Mark Hadar, had worked really hand in hand together. And we said, let's go do something together. And we really thought about, we worked at a SaaS company and we were building products. Like, that's what we had done. Like, that was our background, and had worked with a lot of, you know, big companies, mostly, you know, Fortune 100 companies was our clientele at that last business. And, we were thinking about starting some new product company, and we just went and brainstormed for a few weeks, and we said, you know, let's do some consulting, you know, here while we figure out what we want to do next. You know, we just need to make some money, pay bills, make ends meet until we figure out what we really want to do. And, you know, we didn't even really know what that meant. You know, we were like, let's start a consulting firm, and neither of us have ever done consulting before, you know, so that's something only maybe, you know, 26, 27-year-olds would say, but we were 26 and 27, so it made perfect sense. And, you know, what I think we recognized was that most of these companies that we were serving at the SaaS company, like, we were having to integrate into their systems and working a lot with their IT teams. And we thought, you know, really, this is around the time where it was really becoming very clear to us that, like, every company was going to be defined by technology. Every industry was going to be defined by technology. Every industry was going to be one with technology in some way. We decided to do some consulting, trying to figure out, you know, how to make it. We were just trying to make some money, try to pay the bills, try to make ends meet while we figured out what we really wanted to do. And so we were like, let's do some consulting, let's call, everybody that we know, and let's start, calling and see who needs help building things, right? We build technology products, like that's what we'll go out, we'll help people do that. And we had never done consulting before, but, that's what you do, right? As an entrepreneur, sometimes you're like, all right, well, how hard can it be?
Was it
But
the joyful idiot of being a young 26,
that's right.
27?
Yeah, I think it's, you're 26 or 27.
Ignorance
you're like,
is bliss
let's start a
type mindset.
consulting firm. We've never done consulting before. Like that's, again, something only 26 or 27-year-olds would say. But, what we really found, and like where we found like our, place in the market and our niche in the market, was really in product engineering, is what that space became known as. And around 2010, 2011, like even really that term didn't even really get widely adopted until the late 2010s. But it ultimately became known as product engineering. And, when we first started it, we saw it as very different from like traditional IT, that these big companies we had been serving, their IT departments, do lots of corporate IT things and IT functions. That's very different than somebody designing, architecting, engineering a product in a line of business that maybe they're going to take to market to drive revenue for the business, or maybe some proprietary technology that delivers some sort of unique competitive advantage for a business. That's not what most IT departments focus their time on. If you look at an Amazon, an Apple, a Google, that's not what their IT department does. Their product teams are who does those things. But in like the non-digital native companies, like they didn't really differentiate between those two sides of the world. If it was software and technology, the IT department owned it. But what we really recognized in serving that clientele was that they really didn't understand how to build great products. That just was not what they did. You didn't really understand like what was so different about that. I think the market didn't even really see what was different about it. When we came out and said, we're doing product engineering, we build technology products, people would say, okay, so you're, IT? And we're like, no, we're product people, design, or, oh, you're a design firm. We're like, well, we do design and engineering. And they're like, well, nobody's good at both. And we were like, that's just crazy. Like, that's, to build great products, you have to be good at both of those things. And, really, I think we were part of a very early group who really understood that every company really needed these capabilities to win in their space. That was their industry. I mean, all their industries were going to be won with technology, right? Like, I mean, you can see that now. It's pretty, it's everywhere, right? Everybody sees that. Everybody uses technology to gain an advantage over their competition, to do things better, faster, cheaper, differently, right? There's lots of advantages with technology. That's a very obvious thing at this point. But I don't think people really understood like what that meant and how to get there at the time. Since then, this stuff has really, become commonplace. But, we're thinking back, this is in 2010, 2011, right? Really 2011 when we started doing that, kind of singing from that songbook, along with a handful of other firms. And really it ultimately became its own space. It got, I think it started getting recognized as something fundamentally different, as a different capability than these companies had historically. I think everybody now really agrees that they need that. They have a product mindset. You can't walk into a company now where they, would debate this anymore. They'd say, oh, of course we do that. We absolutely do those things. We know we need it. But when we started the business, that was not common at all.
In the business, are you referring to the Dialexa business?
Yeah, that's Dialexa.
Dialexa. And how big was your founder team on that?
There was two of us. Yeah,
okay.
Just two of us. We were two broke guys in my business partner's mother-in-law's garage. So that was where we started, and we lasted there for all of a few days. And then we did a trade out. There was a guy who had started the first co-working space in Dallas, which I had worked at a prior startup before. I went to work at the company where Mark and I met, and we ended up cutting a deal with him. He had a startup, and we said, hey, we'll do some work for you, and just trade us out for rent. And so we moved there, and then we hopped around for quite a few places. But I think we had like 5 offices in the first 2 years or something.
And what was the process to go from two broke guys in a garage to like, who was your first hire?
We hired a couple of young guys that were we had met through just the startup community. One I had known for several years, and then another we met, like this co-working space we had was kind of like startup party central. It's called Cohabitat. So a lot of the people that were around in the startups in the, mid late 2000 aughts and, early 2010s, knew that place. And it was really a gathering point for a lot of the startup community. And so they had lots of social events, and we started getting a lot of, engineers and designers, a lot of who had corporate jobs, worked at big companies, and would come to this who were interested in startups and maybe not staying in a corporate job forever. And one of those guys worked at Lockheed Martin. Another one was a startup, community guy that I had known for a few years, and we hired them really, I feel like within, a week or so of each other. So we kind of hired like 2 people quickly, but it's always that balance of like, we didn't have any money to hire anybody. So we did all the work ourselves, all the selling, all the building, everything, just us for a bit. And then we hired those 2 guys, as soon as we landed enough work to really support them.
Yeah, were they engineers?
And both engineers, yes.
And then what was because I'm fascinated with like the process of going from scrappy startup to something eventually that IBM picks up.
Yeah.
Because obviously that's a full evolution of a building a business.
Yeah. How much time do you have, right?
All night.
Yeah. I think that you do that one step at a time, right? And a few leaps here and there, right? And so I think that, you start by surviving. When you're a bootstrap startup, your first mission is to survive, right? Like if you die on the vine, then, you never have a chance to get started. So I think it goes from surviving to then like, let's get some sort of team and let's see if we can start to get a flywheel turning, to then getting some sort of like real structure in place, some real organizational structure in place that can actually support and facilitate growth into something much bigger. If you look at the journey, I'd say that you go from that survival of like 2 people really where we didn't even know what the hell we were doing to then starting to understand it, seeing the big opportunity really, making those first few hires, delivering great work for your early clients. I think that's really how we built our business, was doing what we say we were going to do, really business fundamentals, right? Let's do what we say we're going to do. Let's deliver great work. Let's finish things on time. Let's be good to work with, all the real basics. But, at the end of the day, let's do really great work. And that's how we built our business, was on that foundation of excellence. And that's really what we sold into market, and we delivered on that. And we continually delivered on that. I think for, really forever. I'm not going to say we never made mistakes or, we're perfect the whole time, but it was really important for us to try to do a really great job. We weren't just out trying to bill hours. And I think that it's plenty of consultants like have a bad name, for doing that kind of thing and for bad acting, just like in any industry. But we were just trying to be different in that regard. Let's do really great work. Let's execute fundamentals. And, we were word of mouth. So we didn't really have a marketing engine. We didn't really have a sales engine for 5 years or so. It was really founder-led selling and delivering.
What do you think was the real turning point where everything started clicking and going, okay? Because I can imagine you probably had a growth like this and then, an exponential.
Yeah. So I think that, our growth curve, it really is like, big step functions, right? Like it was, we'd go from like really like steady state, and then we'd go boom, we'd hit a growth spurt, and then we'd be like steady, and then boom, we'd hit a growth spurt. So it never went like, that. It was never just smooth hiring. It was like you'd have 5 people, and then it was like, hey, we need to hire 7 more, right? You'd double in 2 weeks or something, And I think that was just, when you're small, like it's easy to see how it can happen, right? It's like we've got one project and we need 3 people to do that. We landed another project, we need 4 more. Oh, your company just doubled, right? As you hit scale, that becomes a lot harder. But I think there were several moments in time where I think growth really ramped. And, if I think back, I can think of a handful of really impactful moments. One was when mean, one was when we landed our first deal, like that was great. And that was for a company called Natural Dental Implants, and they were changing the way dental implants were done. And we built this image processing software for them. That was really neat stuff. Still, it's I think one of the more interesting things we ever did. We landed our first big corporate deal. That was probably in 2013 or so. We launched a couple other companies out of Dialexa, out of a thing called Dialexa Labs, which was essentially an internal R&D unit and incubator. That really opened a lot of doors for us because we got a lot of attention for those companies. We spun them out as separate ventures, got venture funding around those, got a lot of publicity around them. That opened up doors. We had never done anything in automotive, and we launched an automotive technology company, and that all of a sudden, like, you've established credibility in that space. You've got a really hot startup that came out of there. Clearly you have, some sort of knowledge base that you can, do some things in that world, right? I think then, after that, like, I think that we tried to really understand, like, how do we go from this, that's probably 30, 35, 40 people, around that time. And then we tried to, like, go charge the hill. I used to, say this was like, in about 2015, like through 2015, really the consulting firm, we thought we'll just use this as like a means to, like, make a living and fund these startups we're going to spin out. And we really figured out, like, no, there's really a big opportunity in the market. This product engineering space is going to take off. Like, it was pretty obvious to us, and, like, we're doing quite well, and we've taken no funding. We've really not tried to ramp up a sales and marketing engine. We've been feeding everything we're making, just to be able to actually pay ourselves and our team, and then to spin out these other companies. But we've really got something here. Like, we need to try to scale that. And so my business partner around 2014, 2015, stepped aside as co-CEO with me and went to run the automotive technology company called Vinli that we spun out. And what I realized was that we had a lot of, like, startup people, a lot of product people. We did not have a lot of internal consulting knowledge. And so to me, I thought...
What does that mean?
So I mean, if you think of your Bains, your BCGs, your McKinseys of the world, your Accentures, your IBMs, whomever, I mean, their whole giant businesses focused around consulting. Like, pretty much nobody at our company had ever done consulting before, and we were about 40 people at that point, right? So, what we felt like we really needed was we know how to do great work. We know how to really design, architect, and engineer really great software, great technology solutions for people. We're really good at this. We still don't really know how to really run a consulting business terribly well, right? And we don't know how to, like, really run accounts inside of these big businesses, and that's, we started and we did a lot of early stage companies, like, early on, because that was pretty obvious, like, why they needed somebody who had, like, domain expertise in a certain industry, but they were not, let's say it was, you're an expert in, car dealerships, and you've got an idea for some software around car dealerships that you think is going to change the world, but you've never built software before. How do you build a startup? Well, you're going to need somebody who actually knows how to build software and help you get to market. So we had a lot of those type of clients early on. But what we really recognized was that, those were very much feast or famine. They're trying to, like, help. They want you to get them to market, and then they're going to go away, which means now you better have another one right behind it. You're constantly on the hamster wheel. Those are not really accounts, right? They're deals. And so to grow a consulting business, every consulting business grown is based on accounts, and you need really strong account management. You need to know how to get into these companies, but then also how to stay in there and how to grow your presence inside of those businesses. There's a lot of consulting fundamentals around that. And that's the thing that we didn't really understand very well. We didn't have experience in that. And so I went out and started looking for, some hires of people who did understand that, started building out, that aspect of our business, some people who had been there and done that, some of the gray hair in the room who could say, well, you guys have something really great here. You got lightning in a bottle. You just don't know what to do with it, and how to take it there. So, made some bad hires, made some really phenomenal hires in that regard. That really stepped it up. And then I think that the market catching, fire and really understanding, fast forward a few years from there, the market really understanding that product engineering was really a thing and something different. I think it was Gartner who came out and said, I think they were the first one to call it, but I could be mistaken. But they said, something to the effect of, hey, this is fundamentally a different industry than traditional IT consulting. And, it's going to be a $600 billion a year industry by 2026. So anytime, like if you follow like tech M&A and like, especially in services M&A, when the analysts come out and they kind of have some sort of new insight or they deem something a new space or some new shiny object, everybody reads those things, and it kind of really like, you could say they either start the trend or they're like following the trend and they're, putting a megaphone on it. But what it does is it causes a feeding frenzy of sorts, because then everybody feels like, hey, that's something different. We don't have that. We need it. Or we're doing it, but we're not doing it that well. Like we need to go faster, right? So it definitely starts like an M&A frenzy around that in the services space anytime that happens. And you can really look at that from, mobile. You can look at it with product engineering. You can look at it with, data science. You can really look at it with any kind of trend. Once it really catches on, the whole market starts really, ramping up around that. And so that was another, major tailwind for us.
We see that a lot as an M&A advisor, the pendulum swinging back and forth as sort of that herd mentality. They all start chasing deals. They bid up prices.
Yep.
Then they back away. It's great if you have the opportunity to sell or buy, depending on what side of that trade you are. I saw a quote attributed to you that talked about the value of having the right team in place and how that drives success. And I'm thinking about that in the context of these big stair-step moves. That it's not this linear, thing that's nice and smooth. How did you maintain? You said you made some great hires and some bad hires. Talk to me about that a little bit, because you're growing very rapidly and you're having to add people in fits and starts, but you're adding a lot of people in fits and starts. Did you get better at the hiring process?
We definitely did, right? We definitely got more systematic in like how we did it. Everybody that grows a business is going to make some bad hires. I think that, I think what I got a lot better at there was like fewer bad hires, but also just recognizing when somebody wasn't a great fit. I mean, sometimes a bad hire is not the fault of the individual. It's that you didn't recognize what you needed, right? So, I mean,
put them in the wrong place.
There's some of my bad hires I made where, in retrospect, it was really obvious they were not going to be able to be successful at that job. And so, and there's other people who oversell themselves or really just can't operate in a startup. You get somebody who's been at a big company. Some of my best hires have been people who operated at scale and could really bring that knowledge, and they knew how to operate there, and they knew how to operate at a startup and a growth company level. And there were other people who were probably great up here based on what we heard and knew, and they came down here and they had no idea what to do.
Then they've done that. Yep.
And so that's just, I think you do get better at filtering that. You do get better at, understanding what questions to ask. I think more importantly, you get better at recognizing it and fixing the problem quickly. I think one of the hardest things to do when you're a startup or a growth company is, you're trying to hire somebody who really you think knows a lot more about something than you do. I think if you're a good entrepreneur, a good CEO, you're hiring people that are a lot smarter and better at, any individual thing than you are. Right. And like, that's how you build great teams. You're like, all right, we need somebody who really understands this really well. What you're saying is like, we probably need somebody who knows more than anybody here about that. So, there's a trick of, how do you hire somebody who, is much better, much more experienced, much more knowledgeable about a thing than you are? How do you interview that person and know that they're not just full of shit, and because you don't know, you're essentially saying, I don't understand that well. I need somebody who does. And so there is definitely like an art and a science to that. And that's something I think I got a lot better at over time too. But I don't think anybody ever perfects it. So.
No, I agree with you.
One thing on the hiring aspect is, I've been in the entrepreneur space for like 15, 16 years. And it wasn't until I went to the executive MBA program that I even realized that there's a completely different human out there, which is the corporate person. because in my cohort, with all the respect to the world of them, there's 35 of us, but only about 4 or 5, maybe 6 are entrepreneurs. Everybody else is, VP track, C-suite,
Right.
whatever. And they have all fairly impressive careers, but just the way they look at a problem is completely different than an entrepreneur will look at it. Because maybe they have all the budget in the world. And as an entrepreneur, you're like, there's no more money.
Right.
So you have to be way more scrappy. But at the same time, there's some individuals that, there's always somebody else to fix their problems for them.
Yeah.
But where in the entrepreneur world is, you're usually an island.
Yeah, I think that it's a good thing that not everybody wants the same thing and is a good fit at the right time. If everybody was like, at their best at a 2 to 3 person company, who would you hire when you're at 1,000 people or at 10,000 people, right? So I think that there's like different people who are better fits at different stages of a life cycle of a company. And I think that, that's what makes the economy work, right? Is that not everybody really thrives at, the handful of people stage, and then, other people don't thrive when something is at 100,000 person stage, and then there's everything in between. It really is amazing how much things change from when you're just a handful of people to when you're 10 or 20, to you're 50 to 100, then you hit a couple hundred and it's totally different, to then you get into a big organization. I've had the experience of all of those, and it's just incredible how different it is. And I think some of those people that, are more corporate minded, they can be super valuable at scale, but it's just... Yeah. It's like it's a different skill set, a different personality, a different mindset. And I think that, people are always looking to understand each other. I think when you're, what I found when I joined a really large company was that there were a lot of those people who were super inspired by entrepreneurship and startups. They had always been in corporate, and they really wanted to learn and get some of that DNA and that mindset and understanding, what's that lightning in a bottle thing? How do I get some of that? And then I think when you're, at an early stage company, or you're at a growth company especially, and you look up and you kind of feel like constantly, we don't know what the fuck we're doing. And I hope it's okay if I swear on the show, because I'm, guilty of that far too often. But you feel that way, that you just have no idea what you're doing. There's that constant feeling of, we don't have our together. And you kind of look at these companies that are very well-oiled, seasoned, have been around a long time, and it feels like, and they've laid their playbooks out, and you pitch against them, and you're like, oh my God, they've got all this stuff really well, oiled and ironed out. And I think as you grow, you kind of crave that, right? You're like, man, this is so chaotic down here. We're agile, we can move quickly, we can adapt on a dime, we can make decisions on the spot. But you never feel like that you just have things really as well oiled as you'd like them to be. And I think one thing I have learned, at least, is that all these really fancy pitch decks and things that seem super well organized and oh man, this machine, it really just, everybody knows exactly how it works and everything. There's definitely some BS in that, in the shiny slides. At the same time, you down here, you know more than you think you do, and you don't really need to be that, buttoned up, but you can learn from each other, right? I think that's my big takeaway, was that, having had those experiences, I'm like, there is really a lot to learn from, all these different people and these different, life cycle stages of a company.
So the batting average for companies to achieve what you achieved, and grow and scale I don't know the exact numbers, but it's really, really small. So what you achieved is you were an outlier. I think that, and I've started businesses and run them and scaled them. The hardest part for me, particularly when I was your age or a little bit older in my first business, was stepping out of the role of being the guy that did everything, which you described, right, you and your partner. So I left a Wall Street firm and became an independent registered investment advisor, wealth manager. It was myself, a partner, and one assistant. And I did everything. I literally would call the Schwab trading desk and place the trades. I would rebalance the portfolios. I would do the Excel spreadsheets. So most businesses get stuck there, right? And the owner's not willing to sort of give up, that level of control and that involvement. You did. So what was that evolution like? At what point did you and your partner say, we got to stop being the business development engine and the guys that are doing the product development?
That's a really hard thing, because I think that, I swung that pendulum too far both ways. I think my natural tendency is a control freak. And I think that, it's really hard, like, especially if you build like a business on excellence and quality, right? And you're like, how things should be done. Like, how you want people to treat your clients, how you want, what good looks like. I think bringing other people in, like, there's always that feeling that, like, that injects risk and that people can't do it as well as you can, or like, there's never a good time to transition, right? And so, like, well, if I bring somebody in and let them do that, I mean, are they going to drop the ball for a while? And people are like, oh, you got to let them learn. And you're like, well, I'm going to let them learn and, like, disappoint my client, right? So, like, there's like, how do you do that? How do you safeguard that? How do you bring people in? How do you scale? I think part of that is like by hiring the right people. I think we looked for way more talent than experience at Dialexa for years and years and years. I think that was something that, probably, until I left, like, we still would say that. Now there's a certain amount of, like, we need experience and skills as well. Like, but take like a 1 year, a software engineer who's super talented with 1 year experience over somebody who has 5 years experience and is mediocre talent. Right? That 1 year person, put them in the right environment, in the next 6 months, I mean, they'll be better than that person with 5.5 years experience now. And at 2 years, they'll be 10 times better than that person will ever be. Right. And that's, that's really what I say when we looked for talent. It was like, we really wanted, like, to find the best and the brightest, and we'd help mold them into things. Now, I think later you need to bring those people in that, like, have been there, done that. So it's part of it is, like, I think understanding of, like, when you need internal knowledge versus external knowledge, right? And, there are certain things, like, we didn't need to go try to define, like, an account management playbook and start that from scratch. Like, that would have been pointless.
I get you got to bring in talented people. You want the right people in the right seats doing the right things. And sometimes the person with less experience is the better hire. I'm curious about how you and your partner stepped out of being the guys doing the stuff day to day and transition, gave that authority. Because you're right. I mean, I had the same challenge, which is, I'm better than the person I'm going to hire at doing the task I'm going to ask them to do, because I've done it and I've built the system and I'm experienced. So I'm, by definition, empowering somebody to do something that's going to interface with my client. And initially, they're not going to be able to do as good a job. So there's I think a real struggle there that you've articulated. How did you get past that?
I mean, I think you have to if you want to grow, right? I mean, that's the simple answer, is you have to. And so I think that, part of that is coming up with a way that you're going to onboard new people, how you're going to get them in. We had that struggle even when, we were at scale for several hundred people, and, a few of my coworkers, built a system called Ready to Grow, Ready to Serve. Yeah. And it was talking about, like, how do we rotate new hires into experienced teams? Like, for example, if you have, let's say, Dialexa is part of IBM now, and we land a new project with, we're fully staffed, and we land a new project that needs 20 people on it. Well, if we hire 20 new people and put them all on that project to staff it, not one of those knows how Dialexa does things. Right. So you can't staff that with all new people. Like, that's not going to work out. They've all been at different companies. They're used to doing things different ways. That's going to be a total cluster. That's not going to work. So, I mean, I think that you have to have, like, certain systems in place. There's also just the personal side of that, which is, like, you have to let go, and know that if you want to grow, certain things have to happen. You have to give people enough room to grow and breathe. And then, I think that, you just do it.
Well, it sounds like, I mean, it's the whole working in your business versus, or working on your business versus in your business. When do you make that transition?
I think there's always a balance of that. There's working in your business and on your business forever. And I think that you just like tip the scales with that, more of one than the other at any given time. And I think that like when you're scaling, like, you can't be caught down in the minutia too much, or else you kind of lose sight, of the big picture. I mean, that's assuming as a founder, if you're serving as CEO, which not all founders do, and they grow sometimes, that they, take a different role than that. And maybe they want to be more operational or, technical or something versus like leading the whole business. In my case, being the CEO, I needed to get out of the weeds because I would slow people down, right? I mean, at a certain point, like you become the bottleneck for sure. And like you are a growth inhibitor. Like I wanted to be a growth catalyst, not a growth inhibitor. And so I had to start working far more on the business. But that doesn't also just mean like putting systems in place. Like I brought a COO in, and she helped put more of these like systems and structures in place and was way better at that than I would ever be. And I was very customer facing, right? I was very client facing. That's what I was good at. That's what I was passionate about. That's where I was most impactful, was on our clients and our people.
When you hired that COO, what were the traits that you were looking for?
I definitely needed somebody who was, very passionate about like the operational elements of the business. In our business, that was running staffing, right? Running recruiting, running sales and, other internal ops, like core business functions, like understood how to make all the different pieces of the business work together. Business, especially at scale, is definitely a machine, and you've got all these different things that need to work together, and there needs to be a rhythm to the business. Right. And so like I wanted somebody who really understood how to work all those things, but how to work all those things together, more importantly, and really enjoyed being down in the weeds operationally of like the day to day and that rhythm and establishing that consistency in the business, the day to day, the week to week, the month to month, which was not what I wanted to be doing every day. And frankly, like it gotten to a scale where, that was not what I had experience and expertise in. I knew I could bring in somebody who understood that way better than me and who also would, be more passionate about it than I was.
Were they from the similar industries?
Yeah, she was from the consulting industry.
Okay.
Yeah, she had worked at PwC, then Hitachi.
Because one of the things that I've gotten a kick out of doing this podcast is the realization that, we all have the same problems. It's just where's the comma?
Right.
So like if you're a startup with 2 or 3 people versus, 2 or 3,000 versus 2 or 300,000, you probably have the same problems. It's just, much larger scales.
Yeah, definitely.
At what point in this process, obviously when you were 26, 27 years old and you're a work sharing space and you're trying to pay the bills and ramp this up, you're not thinking about building a business to sell. At some point, you decided that you wanted to sell the business. How long before, from the time you started thinking, we want to sell, you and your partner obviously had to agree upon that. How long was it before you started down that path?
I mean, I think even early on, like we knew we would sell it. I don't think we ever had this like, attachment to the business that said, hey, we'll never sell this thing.
Right.
Again, both of us are very serial entrepreneur minded and thought, we probably will sell it.
Okay.
And probably will sell 5 more by the time that we're dead, and so I think that, what we didn't know though was like if we were actually going to scale this thing or if this was just like a means of making money for a while. Yeah. That was at the very beginning, but we did see some, really interesting trends in the market. We knew every company needed these capabilities. I think it was just not, we didn't see early on, like if that was going to be our passion to grow that business. And I think that we became really passionate about it when we realized the impact that it could have. It could actually be something substantial and meaningful and really drive change. And then once it starts growing, I think that's just like the realistic, inevitable outcome that if you grow something that is valuable, people are going to want to buy it.
Right.
Right. And I think then it's a matter of like, what's the right timing for that? And there's like, you're right. I mean, I think part of what you're driving at is like the personal element of that. There's, I think there's really like the business needs to be ready, the market needs to be ready, and you need to be ready. Right. And I think that all 3 things have to come together to have a really successful outcome. If you try to sell a business when any of those 3 things are out of whack, like you're really not going to have the type of process or outcome that you hope for.
So did you decide to go to market and take it out, or did IBM come and knock on your door?
We took it to market. So we ran a process. We had some people approaching us, which had happened for years. I mean, really even since before I thought the company was like worth buying even, which is flattering, like really early on when somebody wants to buy it, you're like, really? Like, I don't think there's not really anything here. Like, that's pretty cool. But, then, as you start building something that clearly the market has validated, has real money coming in, real clients, people are wanting to come work there and pursuing you, that you've created as a team, like, that we had created something that was, valuable and pretty successful and something we thought was really special in the market. But then, there were just, those three things were out of whack at any given point in time. Mostly we thought this business just isn't ready yet, and then the market really didn't get it yet. And, when those two things started really coming together, I mean, I think that we, just knew more and more that it was a reality. The more we grew, the more we knew it was a reality, the more people came knocking. And we had some people that were really serious, came in and really wanted to take a deep look and, wanted to buy it. I mean, they wanted to come in and take it out. And so we talked to some bankers that we knew that were extremely knowledgeable in our space, and they were specialists and, had done some really, I think, marquee deals in our world, knew it like the back of their hand.
Right.
They said, well, let us put some stuff together for you because this, this market is really gaining momentum and you guys should consider it. And so we started having a conversation with them, and we did a bake-off with a few different bankers. And we had two really that we knew well and that were in contention. And, once we looked at that, we just felt like, this market timing is really right. It's not going to get better than this. I think that of all the stupid mistakes I made and things I got wrong, I think that, the timing of the market, we felt like this economy is pretty hot right now. Inflation's picking up. Like, interest rates are going to have to come up. This economy is going to get cooled off. That's going to throw cold water on this market. So either it's, our board, we had a conversation. I said, look, I mean, I think we should do something now, or we need to be prepared to wait 5 or 7 years. Right. And we all agreed that like now was the time. And that was in, late 2021 when we had those conversations, and we sold in October of 22. So we really started getting things together in January of 22.
Okay.
And what was the expectation versus reality? Because we've spoke before with other podcast guests where somebody thinks they have a $15 million company and the market really says it's 500,000.
Right.
Like, did y'all have a fairly accurate placement of market value, or were y'all surprised?
Yeah, I think that
for the better or worse.
I think that we had a pretty realistic view of the market. We knew where it was, and then I think that we had, I'll call like what we thought was like a base case, and we had a downside case, and we had an upside case. We ended up in the upside case. So we didn't go out and like get something that was like way out of anything we ever thought, but it was certainly like, I think we were lucky in that, maybe fortunate is a better word, but we were fortunate to have a really competitive process, and we had a lot of suitors. So, for maybe people who don't really understand how those processes run, like, you go out and you cast a net to, however many companies, and you see who's interested, like, right out of the gate with a little teaser, right? Here's a 1-pager about this business. Are you interested in learning more? You get to sign an NDA. We had, dozens of companies respond back and say yes. I mean, we had, I think it was like 85 or 90% hit rate of companies who wanted to like take a deeper look.
Yeah.
And then, we had a lot of like people, pushing really hard to get early fireside chats, early access to meetings and management meetings, and, try to preempt the process and all that, which we ultimately did not really allow anybody to do that.
Right.
But we had some people that were really, pushing hard for that. So, I mean, we knew we had like a really strong process, which I think that competitive dynamic is one of the banker's biggest jobs.
So when you're going through that, what are the things that you're weighing to find the right partner on that? Is it only price, or is it price the institution? Because obviously, if they're acquiring it, they're acquiring the full team that you've built,
Sure.
that you spent years, and whether you love the people you worked with or they're just employees, there's probably still some sort of affinity towards them and doing right by them. So how do you balance price versus the right fit and all those things?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a multivariate equation, right? So I mean, there's the variable that is price. Like, I think that's the number one thing that always comes to people's mind in a deal. And I think anybody who tells you like price didn't really matter is lying. Like, I mean, price matters. Like, it just does, right? I mean, that's a big part of a deal. I mean, what we told people is, look, I mean, this isn't like a highest bidder wins no matter what, but price does matter. So like, you better be within striking distance, like you better be competitive with the top bids or you're just going to get filtered out. I don't care how good everything else is. Like, that's just not going to work, So like, if you're in a situation where you have, multiple bidders, like there's no reason for you to go take a deal that's way under market, regardless of how much you like somebody, right? And so I think it's just, we weighed that, right? We said, okay, look, we had, a group of buyers. Like, I mean, you get a spectrum, right? You have that many bidders. You're going to have people that lowball. You're going to have people that just think it's, different. It's not worth what you think it's worth or what the rest of people think it's worth. And you're like, well, the market gets to dictate that. So you're under for whatever reason. And so I think when we looked at that, and then we said, like, what's the right fit? Where can this company actually like land and have impact, right? Because we knew that was going to be something that was, this like volume 2 of our story, right? We're like, look, I mean, it's pretty cool that we started this business in a garage. We're selling it, it's a very valuable company. We're selling it to, a big business, some kind, or, PE firm, like there were, various PE bidders in there as well. But where can this potentially have like, go from where we are now to a $50 billion company and have a really outsized impact? That would be a really cool volume too. So we looked at that, and we also knew that would translate into great opportunities for our people. But then there was just, the third part, which is the people, right? And the opportunities that are going to be there, for them. And so those all factor in. And I think you just have to like assign weights to them, and it's hard to like, we didn't have like some formulaic, equation like what we put out. We're like, hey, this is 40% and this is 40 and that's 20 or something like that. It was more of like, we kind of factored all those things in. And there were some people we just said, this is going to be a disaster. Like, we don't really like these people. This doesn't feel like a good fit. We're going to be miserable there. Like, we filtered that out, like there's no way that's going to go well.
By the time you start with your partner, it was just you and your partner. Into when you sold, like how many other shareholders were there?
There was only one other outside party that we sold a minority stake to in January. No, we closed in February of 2020, a month before COVID hit. We sold a minority stake to a PE group that was run by a good friend of mine. And basically kind of took on like a third business partner, right? And so there was me and my co-founder. We took on this, what I'd call like a third business partner, really, in their company. And they were great. It's Alteris Capital. And so, I mean, really the cap table was, us three and then the employees. And there were, well over 100 employees who had equity and had, an outcome when we sold. So I think we were generous with equity. We wanted equity to be widespread at the business. We wanted everybody to have the opportunity to get equity. That was something that we felt important by, founders start companies, but teams build companies, right? So like, it's not something that you do on your own, right? You start it, founders always get the spotlight, but, really at the end of the day, it took a lot of people to build that business.
What was it like after 14 years of being CEO? You are semi-retired, you're on sabbatical. How do you feel? How does it feel to no longer be running the business?
It feels good. I'm really happy. I'm very much at peace, right? Like whenever I left October of 24. It was a couple of years after the deal happened. Really passed over the reins to my COO, Ellen Dowd, to become the new CEO. It was really a great, time and opportunity for her and what the business needed in that next phase. something that really matched, her skill set and her abilities and, where she was. And I mean, she was doing, a ton of the work anyway, and it definitely felt like the right time for me, as this business was entering that next phase, and being part of a much bigger ship, because we ran it as a subsidiary for a few years.
Right.
And, I mean, I think really everybody at the company just has to look when you're involved in something like this and say, hey, what's that next chapter look like for me? Is that a good fit for me? Is there a very clear role? Is there something that I'm passionate about? Is there something where this business could really benefit from me? And then you factor all those things in. And, for me, I just said, hey, I think this is the right time for me to step away. There was nothing like wrong. There was no event that happened or anything. It was the right time. And I said, this is a great opportunity for me to just step out, spend a lot more time with my family, with my kids,
pilot's license,
get a pilot's license, learning to fly, which is, that's been a lot of fun, get outdoors a lot more. There's just, it really has been nice to not have I think be in the pressure cooker for so long, to have that just kind of let off, to have freedom to think about what I want to do next. So I spend a lot of time thinking about, what I want to do in this next chapter. And that's, it's when my wife threw a retirement party for me, and she said, that's the invitation said Scott's first but not last retirement. So, which I thought was pretty funny. So, it's a mini retirement, it's a chance to take a break, a chance to step back and not be thinking about what's next while I'm have a million things going on. So I really want to think about, what does this next chapter look like for me? What am I passionate about? What's the big problem in the world that I think I want to go solve, and, spend the next, however many years doing that. So it's been really great. I have enjoyed it a lot. I haven't second guessed the decision, once. That was really clear as the right decision. I miss a lot of the people that I work with. And it's strange, when you start something and you've been there that long and then you leave, it is weird, it's weird to leave, even if it feels right.
It's the family dynamic to have all this time available. How old are your children?
They are I have a 14-year-old daughter, a 12-year-old daughter, and a 9-year-old son.
Has that changed your relationship with them? Were you a workaholic? Were you in the office until 8 at night, and now all of a sudden you're home and spending time with them?
I'm definitely home more. I'm able to do a lot more with them. Miss a lot less stuff. So yeah, I think it's been, a good thing. I think sometimes, they're maybe I'm around too much, but
I had that dynamic. My father was an early Holiday Inn franchisee, which was started in Memphis by a classmate of his in high school. And he was on the road where he had built and was operating these Holiday Inns, and then he sold out. And all of a sudden he's home all the time. And he's telling me what to do. And I was like, wait, who are you? Why are you here? Doesn't sound like that's the dynamic in your household. But as a founder, owner, operator, he had to figure out where to put that time and energy, right?
Yeah.
I think that people that start businesses and grow them are wired a little differently. And I'm sure your motor is telling you there's something else to do. Although it sounds like you're placing that energy in some really productive and positive places.
Yeah, I am for now, but I think it took me 3 days into retirement to tell my wife, I'm getting excited about starting a business again. And she was like, what? And I said, I don't know what it is yet, but just the idea of doing something again it didn't take me long to get excited about that. But I think I'm going to be I'm taking it slow to wait for the right thing to be there to really dive back in, because, you just, once you dive into something, it's,
What do you think it'll be?
I don't know yet. I've kicked around a lot of different ideas and having a lot of conversations. I have started just meeting with a lot of really smart people again that I know that are really successful, a lot of entrepreneurs, and just kicking around ideas. And what do you think about this? Is this
How do you feel about media?
Media? Yeah.
I need a partner.
I don't know much about media. That's the problem. I'm not sure how much value I'd add to a media business.
Speaking of that, one of the companies you incubated is your wife's, and Rosie Wellness, if I remember the name correctly. What was that like? How did that happen? Where was the chicken and the egg in terms of that business and your wife and the connection with your firm?
Yeah, that was really interesting. We were We were actually on our way back from, I think it was Thanksgiving. We both grew up in Arkansas. My family's from Arkansas, so is hers. And we were in the car, and she said, "Hey, I've got this idea." And I was like, she's like, "Don't roll your eyes at me. Don't do that." And, like I've really thought about this, like saying in the business we were in, like, at Dialexa, we had people come to us all the time, these kind of just, half-baked random ideas and wanting to meet and, tell us about things. So, I mean, I didn't, feel that way about her bringing something up, but, she had heard me all the time go like, "Gosh, I wish people would just think through stuff for a little bit more before they want to like come like spitball it, and, but she had, really felt like there was a gap in women's health care that, she could address. And, she told me about it, and I was like, that sounds like a really good idea. That sounds really interesting. And she had put a lot of thought into it and really knew a whole lot about this space. And, that went on for, I don't know if it was like, a month. And, I put her in touch with some other people that weren't me that, were venture capitalists, other entrepreneurs. I was like, well, go talk to, so-and-so, put her in touch with a few people. It was like, just bounce it off of people that are not me. And she came home, she's like, "I want to do this." And she was like, I think I've got to go full time if I'm going to do it. I said, "Absolutely. If you're going to start a business, like, I mean, you got to jump in. It's hard enough if you dedicate 100% of your time." And I think that there's, very little to no chance if you don't do that it has, that it can be successful. And she was like, "I'm going to sleep on it." And the next morning, she's like, "I'm in." She sent out letters to all of her patients and said, "I'm, moving on. I'm going to go, you left private practice. I'm starting a company and referring you out." And I mean, she jumped right out into the deep end. And like, I never would have thought like our worlds would come together like that. Like, it just never even occurred to me that was a possibility. She didn't, she was never like at home, like talking about being an entrepreneur or anything else, like that wasn't like a thing where she was just searching for something. She just saw a market need, and it was really fun.
Was it before or after you exited?
This was before, yeah. So this is like maybe, gosh, I think 7 years ago, 6, 7 years.
So it wasn't like, "Oh, well, you did this. This was easy. I can do it."
No. She was there since the beginning, so she definitely knows it wasn't easy.
Yeah.
She lived through a lot of really difficult times, so she knew better than that. No, I think she just had like a lot of entrepreneurs, like, she saw a need and felt so passionate about it that she just said, I always told her, I was like, I mean, this is still the way I feel too, like, see if you can find something like keeps you up at night for a few weeks, right? And if you're still thinking about it, then like there's probably something there. I think we all have, ideas. I think, most ideas we come up with are dumb, right? And they just are, right? If you have a creative brain and you're kind of constantly thinking of ideas, like you can, for 5 minutes, you think you've got the next greatest thing. And then 5 minutes after that, you figure out why it's a completely stupid idea and that'll never work, and you move on. I think when you get stuck on something, for probably weeks and you're like, "Oh my God, I have to do this." I've got a few of those things I've been thinking about for a couple of years that I'm like, I still like this. Maybe there's something there.
So what's the end story on her business? Is it still operating?
Yep. Still operating. Okay. Yeah.
So she's now the entrepreneur in the family.
She's the entrepreneur in the family. So yeah. Yep.
Good.
The active one.
On that.
Thank you.
And what an interesting, and that was, that worked out well. You never know when husbands and wives, business lives intersect, how that's going to play.
I know. Yeah. We actually, it worked really well for us. I think there was definitely a period of adaptation for sure, to where she would come home and that's all she'd want to talk about because she was just so excited. And I was like, I got to have some separation from this, at work. Like, I told her, I was like, "You just schedule some time with me." And she was like, "What?" I'm like, "I'm your wife. I'm not scheduling time with you." I was like, "You're not scheduling time with me as my wife. You're scheduling time with me as an entrepreneur." Like, right. That's like, we're scheduling that time. Like, this can't be like 24/7. Like, we got to have some space. And, aside from that, absolutely. Yeah. Gave her a great deal. No, I think that, just like learning to like have some sort of boundaries with like home and work. And that's always, we were both really excited about it. So it was a lot of fun to talk about it. And I was on the board for a while, which was also, an interesting dynamic. And then, we raised a pretty, decent sized round of external capital, and I stepped off of the board, and she had a couple of venture firms jump in the business. And so, one of those took a seat on the board and I stepped off. And I think that was probably like, way healthier dynamic for a lot of different reasons for her to have, just an unbiased party on there and somebody that, really was going to not have that relationship. And I tell her, I mean, she obviously always has access to me. So sometimes she wants my opinion and other times she doesn't.
So you beat the odds with your business, and then your wife starts a business from scratch and ends up with venture funding and an operating business. I don't see many husbands and wives that start two separate businesses and achieve success. So there must be something in the water, at the house, or maybe it's an Arkansas thing.
Yeah, it could be an Arkansas
What
thing.
part of Arkansas?
I'm from Fort Smith.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, you could always go back to school,
I know.
in the executive MBA program. And
I think I would enjoy school a lot more now than I did when I was in school. So
Yeah, you take it more seriously, I think.
Yeah.
Less distractions.
you learn what you want versus like feeling like that natural continuation from high school to college, and where you're just like, that's the natural next step. And it's just, more school versus now you'd be like, I'm going to go learn about something I'm super interested in.
Right.
And just like I would have a totally different mindset, about it. But yeah, I got pretty bored in school too many times. So
Can understand. Well, Scott, we appreciate you being with us on the deal table in the big room at Old.
yeah, thank you guys for having me.
You've had a really interesting entrepreneurial journey. Congratulations on the success you've enjoyed, and we'll be looking forward to seeing what your next iteration is. You said that you had the mindset, you and your partner, that you would do this 4 or 5 times, even when you were probably in your early 30s, which is really interesting. So we look forward to number 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate you guys. It was fun.
Thanks.